Centuries of systemic racism have created a wealth gap in America between black and white Americans. In her latest New York Times piece, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Nicole Hannah-Jones writes, if true justice and equality are ever to be achieved in the United States, the country must finally take seriously what it owes black Americans.
In January of 1989, John Conyers first introduced H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. Every Congress since 1989, he resubmitted the proposal and reportedly planned to do so until it passed into law. Unfortunately, he passed away first in 2019.
Our concerns are moving all parts of this country out of the circumstances of segregation, discrimination, and injustice in our legal system.
So what is H.R. 40? Well, the number of the bill, 40, was selected to symbolize the 40 acres and a mule that was initially promised to freed slaves by the United States government.
Today is Juneteenth, which commemorates the emancipation of slaves after the Civil War. A House Judiciary Subcommittee hears testimony this morning about slavery reparations. A bill before the committee would create a commission to study and consider reparations.
This unfulfilled promise, as well as the devastation that slavery had on the African American life, has never been officially recognized by the United States government. The bill does four things. One, it acknowledges the fundamental inhumanity and injustice of slavery. Two, it establishes a commission to study slavery and the subsequent racial and economic discrimination against freed slaves. Three, it would study the impact of these forces on today's living African Americans. And four, it would then make recommendations to Congress for appropriate remedies to redress the impact on today's living African Americans from these forces. When it comes to financial compensation, how does one quantify racial trauma? It's tricky business, but lawyers, academics, and activists have tried, and some have come up with numbers as low as $17 billion to as high as $5 trillion. And believe it or not, these are pretty modest estimations. If you want a more accurate depiction of cost, here you go. The United States alone benefits from 222,505,049 hours of forced labor between 1619 and the abolition of slavery in 1865. Accounting for inflation at minimum wage, this total debt would come to around $97 trillion. And this doesn't even account for labor that happened before colonial times or legal discrimination and segregation after the emancipation. That rhymed.
Scholars who have worked on calculating compensation don't always agree. For about 30 years, William Darity has discussed the rationale and design of reparations. Today, he says it will cost the United States government between $10 trillion and $12 trillion. To put that in perspective, in 2019, the US GDP was about $21.5 trillion.
The share of wealth in the possession of Black Americans ought to match, at least match, the share of the population.
A more conservative estimate looks at the 40 million acres that should have been allocated to the 4 million freed men. The present value of that land is about $1.5 to $2 trillion. If about 35 million Black Americans are eligible, the minimum estimate would amount to between $40,000 and $60,000 per person.
But that is a lot of money, so where would it come from? Well, there are a few suggestions. Federal and state governments that upheld the institution of slavery, businesses that benefited financially from the institution of slavery, or as attorney Willie E. Gary suggested when he spoke to Harper's Magazine in 2000, individual wealthy families, mostly in the South, that amassed their wealth on the backs of slaves could be sued for reparations.
But while Democrats seem to be uniting behind the idea of reparations, people on the right are just as united behind the idea of hell no.
It is the party of reparations. Presidential candidates say Americans should be rewarded or punished based on their skin color.
My great-great-grandfather, he fought with the Union Army. Do I get a discount?
No need to grapple with practical questions about the proposal, like how you determine who receives and who pays for the reparations, how much it would cost, whether Nigerians who just arrived here would benefit.
Okay, what?
But as you can imagine, it's not that simple. You can't just force corporations or individuals to give away their money. But what else could reparations look like? It could come in the form of special social programs or land resources. It could be a mix of cash and social programs targeted to help Black Americans. It also doesn't have to be a direct endowment to the descendants of slaves. There are also proposals that suggest it could mean investing into Black neighborhoods, or how about free tuition to community and state colleges? Look, I know the term reparations has turned a lot of you away already, but trust me, it's not that wild of a concept. It's been done before. What, you want examples?
Reparations are the act of making amends to someone or a group of people who have been wronged. Germany paid billions of dollars in reparations to Holocaust victims or their families and to Israel after the Nazi atrocities of World War II. And in 1988, the U.S. paid more than 80,000 Japanese Americans who were held in internment camps during World War II. They each got $20,000. But African Americans have never gotten reparations for their 246 years of slavery.
Okay, I'm warning you, this next example is really messed up. North Carolina gave reparations to citizens that underwent forced sterilization. I'm not fucking around. Sterilization was a practiced form of eugenics in the United States, but North Carolina was one of the only states to give their victims reparations. The state sterilized about 7,600 people, most of whom are no longer living, but passed a $10 million reparations program that should give the more than 177 living victims somewhere in the range of $50,000 each.
North Carolina is the first state to consider making amends with a cash payment, $20,000 for each victim.
It sounds to me like you're still
hurt. I am devastated. I am mad. And I'm tired of hiding my feelings, and I want everybody to know who should pay.
So the question is, what do we want? No, I mean, really think about it. What do we want? Do we want to calculate and have a direct endowment transferred into our account for the past and present atrocities? I mean, all the examples we've seen of that have been pretty underwhelming. $1,400 for loss of property, $50,000 for being sterile, or how about $77,000 for being untreated with syphilis during the Tuskegee experiment? I mean, if we want to go this route, we can go this route. We can crunch the numbers all day and figure out what our trauma is worth. But is that the best route? I mean, let's face it. When the time comes, if the time comes, we've got one shot to make this right for our future. So what do we really want?